You've reached Hotel Pacifico, your five-star destination for BC politicos. Press 4 for room service. Press the star key for your hosts Mike McDonald and Kate Hammer.
Welcome back, guests, and good to see you, Mike and Geoff.
Good morning.
It's good to see you, Kate.
All right. Later in the strategy suite, we'll talk about what was and maybe more importantly, what wasn't in the throne speech, what's ahead for the Conservatives this weekend as they gather in Nanaimo for their AGM, how David Eby and the NDP seem to have got a new trade war spring in their step, and we'll finish off with a clipping that will set us up to discuss some of the tripping hazards ahead. If we have time, guests, we're going to try and talk about Vancouver City Council and the question of who gets to have a caucus meeting or not and why. But it's another jam-packed show, and we've got a fantastic guest today. It is our pleasure to welcome the 30th Lieutenant Governor of British Columbia, recently retired Janet Austin, to Hotel Pacifico, back to Hotel Pacifico, in fact. She served as LG from 2018 to 2025. In fact, she was the first vice-regal representative in BC since 1952 to serve under two monarchs, Queen Elizabeth II and King Charles III. You know that is a fact pulled from Mike McDonald's brain, guess. Prior to her appointment as LG, Janet served as CEO of the YWCA Metro Vancouver and also served as chair of the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade, among many other accomplishments. Our regular hotel visitors may recall she dropped in at the hotel for our Christmas party in December, which was super fun. There was also a canine guest, which we all super appreciated. Welcome back to Hotel Pacifico, Janet.
Oh, thanks so much, Kate. It's great to be here.
Okay, can you start off? This one's for a debate that happens in my home with my dad, who's British, right? And he actually, so I have a British father and an American mother, right? So an American mother, we had to explain a constitutional monarchy to, and a father who inherently believes it is the best type of government you could possibly have. Can you tell us a little bit, like, why do we need the crown here in Canada? What's the value of it?
Well, you know, Kate, I think that's a really important question, and I think it's important for Canadians to think about it and to discuss it. My personal view is that having a constitutional monarchy is a stabilizing characteristic of Canadian governance because we have a separation of state and government, which is different from a republic where you have those two functions combined in one person. So it connects us to a tradition of parliamentary democracy, equality under the law, protection of our human rights, and it also links us to the Commonwealth of Nations, so nations that have, similar values. It's also a check on the power of the First Minister. So I feel very strongly that it is a stabilizing characteristic that has enabled Canadian society to move forward in a constructive way.
So do you have an example from your own tenure, like where you felt like you played a stabilizing role?
Well, it's a unifying role. It's a neutral, nonpartisan role. And I have always worked hard to maintain that reputation myself throughout my many years in active service, I guess you could say. So yes, I have always worked very hard to be very even-handed in my relationships with people across the partisan spectrum. And I think that's been valued and appreciated. I think that gives me perhaps a little bit more flexibility than someone who has come from a direct partisan background. But that's not to say that people who have served in partisan roles are not very effective vice-regal representatives. So I think, I could talk a little bit about the reserve powers of the Crown, which I think are also not well understood. I mean, the reserve powers it's the prerogative of the Lieutenant Governor to act independently when necessary. So normally you act on the advice of the First Minister and Executive Council or Cabinet, but in extraordinary circumstances, it may be appropriate to exercise those powers independently. And so, of course, we saw that with Her Honor Lieutenant Governor Judith Guichon in the 2017 situation, which you're all very familiar with. For myself, I would say that the pandemic was really an important moment, an aha moment, because
I just like to interrupt and note that Geoff was smirking when you said that.
Also, I don't think we've managed an
Well, I
episode
thought it
without
was-
talking about
I know. I
2017.
detected
It was
a
a very
smirk.
diplomatic understatement,
It's okay.
Janet.
It's okay,
Very
Mike.
diplomatic.
Sorry, I missed that. I missed your
It was a little
Your
27.
smirk.
It
I
was a
was
little
smirking
2017
at
smirk
Mike,
going
not
on
you.
there.
Yeah. It's a
Who
little
won
bit
the
of a
election? Who won the
segue.
election again, Mike? Remind me.
We 100 years from now. Anyways, we're not going to have this argument again because I already know I won. So there you go.
Well, sorry, another example, Janet, I was wondering if you were going to go to too, was just the decision, when the Horgan government decided to call an election in 2020.
Yeah.
I mean, it would have been part of your role, right, to determine if that was appropriate and whether that could be done safely.
Yeah, absolutely. So when Premier Horgan requested that I dissolve the legislature, I felt it was important for me to do my due diligence around that. And I had two questions that I think were important and needed to be answered. And one was, can the election be conducted safely during the pandemic? And so that meant, can people go to the polls to vote and feel safe? But I was also wanted to be assured that vulnerable populations, their ability to vote would not be impaired, rural communities. And so I spent a fair bit of time with the chief electoral officer, and I really grilled him. We went through all the plans he had in place, the plans for mail-in voting, what was going to happen at the polls, everything. And I felt very confident after that he had taken a very thorough look at it, and they were well prepared. So I was satisfied on that point. I also felt the importance of ensuring that the management of the pandemic would not be impaired by the distraction of the ministers. And so I spent time with Dr. Henry and also some legal advisors to look at that. I was confident in that Carol James was going to remain in place. And as we know, she's a very capable, experienced person. So that gave me confidence. And the ministers do remain as ministers during that period, and they could be called upon if necessary. So between Dr. Henry and myself, we had a good conversation, and I felt confident that the management of the pandemic would not be impaired. And on that basis, I felt that it was a political decision. It was Premier Horgan's choice to make.
Can I ask about a second one? Where I think the public sees you the most, or sees the Lieutenant Governor the most, is delivering the throne speech, which, I had the opportunity to participate in the drafting of on a number of occasions. And although I think the Lieutenant Governor looks like a sort of a sock puppet for the government in that circumstance, the drafting process is back and forth. And I wonder if you could speak about that a bit. I don't know if you had any issues with any drafts that I was involved in, but I know there were times when you or your predecessors would say, we would prefer to have it read this way, or we think it might sound clearer the other way. So how much hands-on involvement is there in the throne speech? It's a confusing thing for the public, I think.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I was grateful for the opportunity to review and provide comment, which I certainly did. I stayed away from comments, obviously, on policy, which are the purview of our duly elected officials. But I basically had two consistent pieces of advice. One was to remove as much of the partisan rhetoric as they were willing to remove, and also to just keep it short, because these things, when they're written by committee, you often have a lot of redundancy. And I thought, this is very much a case of where less is more. And I thought, you would have much better attention paid to the overarching themes in the throne speech if you did that. So that's the kind of comment that I provided. But I was careful to stay away from advice on policy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I would be a serial offender on the keep it short advice. Probably
No
would have
such thing as bad short
probably
speech.
would have benefited from your advice. So you come to the job, and it is there are sometimes circumstances that are quite unique and exceptional, such as you mentioned, Judy Guichon's situation, 2017. What comes with the office? Is there here is a list of constitutional advisors that you may call upon, or, here is the expert in this or that, or do you have to go build that yourself?
There is some, but in some respects, it's a job that's difficult to prepare for because you really don't know what's going to come. So essentially, there are three aspects of the role. One is the constitutional role, which we just touched on, and understanding what the reserve powers of the Crown actually are. I think that's particularly important. So, David Johnson, our former Governor General, has written extensively on this, and something that I certainly took advantage of. But there are a couple of very important powers that are not understood. And one is you have the power to dismiss the First Minister and the existing government. So if we ever had a situation where a premier lost an election and was resisting leaving the role, then the lieutenant governor has the right to dismiss that person and that government because our whole system is based on the concept of responsible government, and that would not be a responsible government. So not only do you have that authority, it would also be your duty to do so.
Does that authority exist as an expression of the public will of sort of the vote, or is it something
Yes.
broader than that? Okay.
Well, the whole concept of responsible government, and this is how Canada actually obtained its independence, was through this idea that the province or the country needs to be governed by a first minister who has the confidence of the Legislative Assembly or Parliament, and through the Legislative Assembly, the people. So it's that idea of the vote that I think is really key there.
What what checks are on your power, the power of the LG? Because what I'm just imagining, my mind immediately went to January 6th, you
Yeah.
know, and okay, so Trump was the head of state and he refused to leave or was digging in that day. But in our situation, the first minister is not the head of state.
That's correct. Yeah.
It's Lieutenant Governor, Governor General,
Or on
uh,
behalf of the king.
on behalf of the king. So what happens if the LG goes rogue?
Well, that's a really good question because there's not a lot,
Yeah.
the person who has the actual authority to dismiss a vice regal is the regal, so the king.
Hmm.
However, reality being what it is, that would likely be a request from the prime minister, for
Prime
example.
Minister. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's not a lot. So I think the selection of lieutenant governor is extremely important, and preparation for that role also I think is extremely important. So it's really a self-governing role, I guess you could say, but there certainly are, you know, parameters which are a function of tradition, convention, and that really define the role.
So
Sorry,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
I was just going to ask about Wendy Kachia moving into the role. What advice, was there you have to read this, don't use
Yeah.
that washroom, it's terrible. What were the pieces of advice you offered her?
Yeah, I think Kate, that Wendy and I are close personal friends, and I couldn't be more delighted with her appointment as LG. She's an exceptional person, and she will serve the province exceptionally well. There's no question about that. So it's true, we have had some conversations, and they're very broad-ranging. Often like details of how you prepare and things to watch for and little things to be conscious of to some of the big picture stuff. And so, I certainly have shared with her my experience and the way I approached certain situations. But she is well supported in the staff of the office. Jeremy Brownridge has had a long experience and is a highly respected person, and I think she's really well served by him. But there's also a vice regal family. There is certainly access to Rideau Hall, to constitutional experts. The Deputy Attorney General is available for your advice at any time. So just being aware of the range of sources, I think, is extremely important, and not hesitating to avail yourself of them if you have questions. So certainly Jeremy does a very good, I think, introduction, a broad-based introduction. But again, there's a lot of discretion in the role, and you do have the opportunity to choose certain themes to champion, and you need to be conscious of how to manage that as well.
I'm
Does
curious.
Jeremy go ahead,
Well,
Todd?
yeah, I just want to drill down to some of the things you have to plan for. And you mentioned your due diligence on the 2020 election, but I'm also thinking back. I think it was during your reign. There was a by-election in
Do we call
Nanaimo.
it a rain now? Like you made her blush.
Well, she's vice regal. Was vice regal. Are
Okay.
you vice regal for life? Do you get to keep the title?
Yeah.
I do, but
Okay.
it's never been something that I generally prefer just to be called Janet.
Oh, I totally would keep. I'd want everyone to
Vice
ask
Regal
me.
Janet. Yeah.
Her honor, is that the
Yeah,
title?
that's correct.
Her honor? Yeah, I'd like that. I'd like that for me. The
You
his
never
honor.
know.
Yeah.
Um, but there was a by-election in Nanaimo in 2019, and when Leonard Krogh resigned his seat, and had that by-election gone the other way, it would have put the legislature into deadlock, basically.
Yeah.
Now, I'm interested in what you can say about how you were monitoring that situation, because had the BC Liberals won that by-election, probably would have landed on your doorstep
Mhm.
at some point. So what was your process on that?
Well, I think the only thing you can do in situations like that is be aware of them and follow them.
Mm,
And when you have questions, reach out to people who can advise you and be prepared, essentially. Think about what are the consequences, and if this happens, then what? So, actually, leading up to our 2024 election, and that came down to a very close
mm,
conclusion.
mhm,
But I attempted just to look at it logically, and I made myself a chart of all the things that I thought could happen, and then extrapolated from that. If this
mm.
happens, then this is the result. And then essentially checked that with a few advisors to confirm that there was no inconsistency between my view and their view, and talk through these things. I don't think there's really much more than that you
How
can
big
do.
is this chart?
It was
Yeah.
it was bigger than you might imagine.
Was it like IKEA roll of
No,
IKEA paper, or was
no,
it
it was
like a
it was my own hand-drawn chart
okay?
where I just looked at the number of votes and I looked at, what the split could be, and then just tried to think through the consequences. So it really wasn't any more complicated than that. And I think sometimes we can make things more complicated than they need to be. And so just distilling it down to
I
those
hope you
essential.
kept the chart. I hope it's in the Janet Austin archival file somewhere.
I don't know, I'm not sure. I left a bunch of stuff there, but somebody will go through it all and decide what's worth
Okay, well,
keeping.
it's a
But
historical
is
artifact.
but related, is
Yeah.
there anyone who like comes with you with like, here are the precedents for this type of decision? Here are what other LGs have done in this scenario. Like, do you get a sort of, I
Yeah,
don't,
I mean, you don't get everything rolled into one basket, but certainly on any of those points, there is legal advice available to you. And certainly leading up to the 2024 election, I did my due diligence there as well. I requested briefing information on historical precedents. I looked into the conventions around the role of the speaker, should a tie vote need to be broken, that kind of thing. So I just did my best to prepare as well as I possibly could. And then you just exercise judgment, as one does in life.
One of the hallmarks of your period, though, was you articulated issues that you thought British Columbians should spend more time thinking about. One was reconciliation, and there were others.
Yeah.
How did you go about picking those, and how did that play out for you when looking back on it?
Yeah, I think I had a pretty good idea of what I wanted to focus on before, in the time period I had leading up to my formal installation. And they seemed like obvious things to me. So the three things I picked were democracy, upholding our democratic conventions and public institutions, encouraging participation in civil society, and quite frankly, building respect for elected officials and the public service. So, reconciliation, of course, was another one, and I do believe that reconciliation, we've made some wonderful progress, but it's more than just a moral and a legal imperative. I think it's a strategic investment in a more prosperous, perhaps more equitable future, a sustainable future for all Canadians. And the third one was really an extension of a lot of my previous work, which is the focus on equality, diversity, and inclusion. And so that's a very, very broad kind of a frame. It helped me sort of focus and identify organizations I wanted to champion, whose work I wanted to help amplify. And so, I think those three themes gave me a good frame. I didn't stick completely within them, but I think they gave me a good frame for just bringing the whole mandate together.
Guess, let's talk about false dichotomies. They're everywhere, and they force us into the thinking that in order for one thing to be true, another must be false. An example that shows up sometimes in politics is the line, "You are either with us or against us." A throwback false dichotomy would be how in 80s sitcoms, women could either have a career or a family, never both. Another example from 90s rom-coms would be how teenage girls could either be pretty and date the high school jock or wear glasses. So fast forward to 2025 and the ongoing debate about Canada's natural resources. It can sometimes feel like we slip into a false dichotomy, specifically the idea that we can either profit from the land or protect it. TELUS understands that protecting nature can lead to cost-effective ways of creating a positive impact on biodiversity and the economy. That's the thinking behind their partnership with the Nature-Based Solutions Foundation. They are working together to develop a biodiversity protection standard aimed at protecting endangered ecosystems across Canada with a special attention to old-growth forests. The idea is to implement a science-based framework for protecting at-risk ecosystems while creating measurable environmental and social impact through conservation finance. We'll talk more about this and about TELUS's nature restoration initiatives next week.
When you look back at reconciliation, it was at a very different place when you started than it is today. What's your assessment now after your time in office about how BC is doing with reconciliation?
I think we've reached a tipping point. I really do, And I think, obviously there are going to be pressure points ahead. And as First Nations develop their own systems of governance, there are going to be issues around interface with other levels of government. And these things are going to have to be worked through, and it won't be easy. There will be pressure points. But I do think that there is a legal imperative around it all. And I do believe we've reached a tipping point. So I think we've seen positive progress, no question. There's much work to do, most of the work to do that does lie ahead, but I'm very hopeful for it.
I mean, it's an interesting point on you as a Crown, having been a Crown representative, and the relationship of the Crown to First Nations.
Mm-hmm.
So, is there anything specific to the role of LG that you had to like? Is there anything that wouldn't be apparent to outsiders what that
Yeah,
role entailed because of that? Because I mean, we're going back to Royal Proclamation 1763 here,
yeah.
where that
I think that's
was
your
established.
furthest back reference, Mike McDonald. Congratulations.
I go back further if you want. But,
Okay. Well, we'll aim for the 17th century next time. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I get that question periodically that, you're a representative of the, Crown, the most historic colonial institution, and what right do you have, to participate in this, and what kind of a, reception can you expect? But I guess I felt that because of being the vice-regal representative, there was a special onus on me to be a visible and a vocal advocate. And I felt that, well, who more important, to stand up and say, we can do better, we must do better. And so I did that. And I think I found that, my stance and my approach was very positively received by Indigenous leadership. I certainly had a number of very strong personal relationships that predated my time as lieutenant governor, and I think that was helpful. And so, it wasn't as if it was an abrupt shift from my views prior to assuming the role. So yeah, I would say, perhaps I was lucky, but I didn't really experience any pushback. And I think the work that we took on, establishing the BC Reconciliation Awards, which have been very positively received by Indigenous communities, was an important aspect of that.
Does the role become more difficult as I feel like we're in this moment where the sands can shift beneath us in terms of what is political and what isn't? And I'll use the kind of backlash against EDI that is
Yeah.
more prominent in the States than here, but still, and I'm just thinking that, um, if you're taking a nonpartisan role in trying to drive these issues, does that become more difficult if potentially something that in a moment feels like there's consensus and it's not political then shifts? And there's just less room. There's less room in between these issues.
Yeah, and I think that's something that you always have to navigate, you know, um, with respect to not becoming directly embroiled in matters that are the purview of duly elected officials, not inserting yourself in a partisan debate. But I think that the approach that I've always taken was I always felt that I could use the evidence base to bring profile to issues that are important, you know? And so if you had research and evidence, focus on those things, you can make your points that way without directly engaging in politics. And so with respect to DEI, I would have taken, I think, the same approach, which is to look at the research and to look at the impact that adopting, inclusive behaviors in workplaces and society is very beneficial. And certainly there's evidence in abundance that that's the case. So I think that's safer territory, but you always have to be conscious because the public mood shifts. And it's a question, I think, of being aware of it. And often there can be nuance where you can still make your point, but make it in a way which doesn't evoke hopefully a strong negative response.
Well,
you
I
interviewed.
mean,
Oh,
yeah, go
sorry,
ahead,
go
Jeff.
ahead.
Just to
But
build on that, like to your point, staying rooted in the facts, more and more, we're not agreeing on the facts.
I know.
There's these disparate existence of facts. And I just, like, do you think this job will get harder going forward for that one
Um,
issue?
it's hard to say. I think different people approach the job differently, but yeah, I think, the kind of the difficulty that we feel more strongly now of engaging in respectful dialogue is going to make things more difficult just generally, for any kind of public role, public figure, person who takes that responsibility on behalf of others. So yes, I think that's the case. But I think, we can also find ways, not around it, but perhaps ways to work through it. And something I'm quite interested in is looking at how we can use perhaps different structures to help people have better conversations about some of these big issues.
you were pretty experienced about the province, its economy, and the people who were involved in leadership when you started. But was there something you learned about politics or BC that you didn't expect to a takeaway that surprised you?
There wasn't anything major, Jeff, I'd say, but something that I really have appreciated is the relationship that I've had with our elected officials, our provincial MLAs. I've really enjoyed getting to know them, being encouraging and I think supportive to them in a completely even-handed way. I've enjoyed having them over to enjoy some moments of camaraderie and fun together. And these things may seem trivial, but I actually think they're quite important, creating those opportunities for there to be some collegial social engagement. Is a constructive way of, I think, helping to create, perhaps the conditions for better conversations.
Do you have any wild pool parties there? Because you've got a pool at Government
We do
House.
have a pool. Yeah, I was
It's kind
wondering
of
whether
like
I'd get the
it's a
question.
kind of a weird house. I mean, it's kind of like the Brady Bunch house on steroids, put in a Gary Oak meadow. Like
What?
Yeah,
it's
we
got a
It's
have
like a
some.
70s,
70, it's a
Yeah,
kind of got
70s
a
rancher?
70s vibe
yeah.
to it, but I think
Wow.
it's built in the 50s maybe or 40s or I can't remember.
Yeah, it was the two previous government houses actually burned down. So this one was built in the late 1950s, I think 58 to
Yeah.
university. So yes, I mean, I actually I thoroughly enjoyed the pool, and we did have a lot of pool parties,
Yeah.
a business-oriented pool parties, I also
Business-oriented pool
Pool
parties. You hear
parties,
that?
yes.
where you'd
Well,
have
that's
some
sounds like some
The
a mix
AI
key
of
art
me
of that
high-ranking
would
key
be great.
messages.
officials,
Yes.
university presidents, people like that. But I enjoyed opening the pool for, children. We used to have the Songhees and Esquimalt kids there. Also for organizations like the YWCA, breast cancer, to come and do aqua sizes, things like that. And then I love swimming, so I enjoyed it very much myself. But I think my best pool story is when I first became lieutenant governor, and I was delighted with the pool and had gone down to the pool, nobody else around. So, I really just had some towels and came down the back staircase, went in the pool, and somebody saw the door open and thought, who left this door open and closed it? Well, I had no phone, I had no clothes, you know, and I got out of the pool, realized the door was locked, started waving at the windows, waving at the cameras. No one came. Finally, there was nothing for it but for me to climb over the fence and walk around and ring the front doorbell in my towel. So,
Oh no.
but anyway, the pool did get very good use,
I think
and we get
Wendy
lots of
Kokia
Yeah,
may
hot
want
tip.
you may
Yeah.
want to consider a podcast pool party, I'm thinking.
Oh,
Well,
Podcaster
you
pool
yeah.
have to
party.
ask Wendy about that. I
Mhm.
Yeah.
can't answer for her, but
Well, I
I
think,
wouldn't be up for
podcasts
it.
are becoming a more important thing in life, and let's get
They
with
are. And I'm actually really happy about the emergence of the podcast because you have that opportunity to have a more, nuanced conversation that we're not getting in other media forms.
well, we're doing our best here. A
Yeah.
pool party would help, but we'll soldier on in the meantime.
No, absolutely. Can I
Right.
get
Yeah.
while we're in the behind the scenes stories, I can't let you go, Janet, without asking if you have anything, from your time working with the royal family, the corgis, anything. I mean, for folks who maybe haven't spent time around royals, and any kind of stories you can share of those
Well,
experiences.
I had a wonderful personal meeting with Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth. And that really was it really was amazing. So we visited her at Buckingham Palace, with my husband, and I had expected the conversation to be very much at a superficial level, but we really had a real conversation about some of the big issues internationally. She had very positive memories of Canada. She asked after the volunteers at Government House. I found her to be very agile. Physically agile. She moved very easily, but also intellectually agile. And I think she was well briefed, but it was a real serious conversation, and I enjoyed that very much. She did ask about Macduff, my dog, so she knew about him.
Mhm.
So we
Wow.
had a brief discussion about dogs and how important they are. But just generally, she is a remarkable example, or was a remarkable example of restrained, self-governing authority, and that restraint and that self-government is something that I think is an example to all of us. So that was obviously a highlight. I'll say also though that I had many wonderful honorary aides de camp that I worked with over the years, about 35 of them. But it was not infrequent that we would attend an event, and one of the aides in uniform would be mistaken for the lieutenant governor. And it happened more than once. And I can remember being at my first Canada Day ceremony where I would swear in new Canadians. And I had some members of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police with me. And so they'd ask for a picture, and we're all getting in the picture, and the aides have me in the middle. And the person with the camera says, excuse me, the woman in the middle, would you mind moving out of this frame? You know, so
Um,
things like that would happen, and it certainly does keep one humble.
oh wow, that's fantastic. Yeah. Maybe I should stay in. I don't want to seem like I'm
Yeah,
being
and the
egotistical.
aides would be appalled. Well, no, 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 they're
Oh,
trying to push me forward. No, no, we want you.
oh. Well, On behalf of the people of British Columbia, I would like to thank you and Hotel Pacifico. I'd like to thank you for your service. But until today, we did not know, in particular, the shortening of the throne speeches is a particular kindness that I would like. The brevity in throne speeches is one that I think is a major value add that I didn't appreciate until today, and I'm glad. As someone who's in various capacities had to sit through those, that is a big one.
Well, I have to say, people were always very receptive to my comments.
That's fantastic. That is interesting. All right. Janet Austin, thank you so much. Congratulations on your retirement, and thanks for joining us again at Hotel Pacifico.
Yeah, thanks so much, Kate. It's been a pleasure, and I do love the podcast.
Great. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Your Honor. All right.
And there we go. That was great.
Good. I hope it works for you. I was
yeah.
just thinking I should have said something about being in the royal suite.
Oh.
But then, of course, I never was in any royal suite because we watched the budget very carefully.
Yes. And you didn't have time to meet King Charles III, I suppose.
Well, no, I had met him a long time ago when he was here in 2009, but that was like, hello, nice to meet you.
Not as king.
But I was asked during the pandemic by the Vice-Regal family to represent the Vice-Regals in a conversation with him about climate. And so that was a Zoom conversation, but I very happily carried that on behalf of the rest of the lieutenant governors. So that was a bit more of a personal opportunity to talk to him.
Yeah, cool.
I never read it through the lens of a lieutenant governor, but there was a constitutional crisis in BC where the LG did dismiss the government around the turn of the last century, in the 1900s, and it led to the development of political parties, because there was one point where the government, the guy defeated at the election, it was Joseph Martin, I think it was, tried to keep his...
Fighting Joe Martin.
Yeah.
What's his name now? I know who you mean.
He tried to keep his seat by hurling himself into the seat before his opponent could sit down in it.
Right.
Yeah, it was a very high-level debate. Yeah.
There were 2 or 3 dismissals around that time, and it was flowing from the fact that there were, they didn't have an established system of political parties.
Right.
So it was John Turner, I think Charles Semlin, there were 3 of them.
Yeah.
And who was it? I think it was Edward Pryor. So, but yes, and that was a bit of a schmozzle, but it took place over a period of about 2 years and seemed to sort things out.
Eventually, yeah.
Eventually. Well, that's great. Our listeners will be delighted to hear it.
Yep.
The episode should drop tomorrow sometime.
Okay, that's great. Well, thanks, you guys. I really appreciate it. Keep in
Thank
touch,
you.
and truly, I love the podcast. It's so great to have a focus on BC politics that's done in such a collegial and a thoughtful way. I love it.
Guess another pop quiz from Fortis BC coming to you today. There's nothing more I like to talk about than science. Now, that would be political science. But today I've got some real science, and you're going to have to reach way back to your high school chemistry class for this one. What is the chemical compound CH4 known as? CH4. Any of you know that? Because I know most of you are like me, probably spending more time in arts classes than science classes. But here's a hint. It means this compound has 1 carbon atom bonded to 4 hydrogen atoms, CH4. And what do you call that? The answer, methane. Or most folks call it natural gas. Now, next question. What would happen if we developed a process to separate those carbon atoms from the hydrogen atoms? Well, I personally don't have a clue, but the answer is you would have a process that produces low carbon hydrogen. And that's what our sponsor, Fortis BC, who does know a lot about this stuff, is working toward. Last year, Fortis BC began testing new technology at one of their sites in the Kootenays with the goal of bringing a large-scale hydrogen production facility to BC. The pilot project was enabled by funding from the province of BC's Clean BC Industry Fund and is a partnership between Fortis BC and the Hazer Group, an Australian technology firm. Referred to as the Hazer process, this new hydrogen technology uses a process known as pyrolysis to break apart natural gas into both hydrogen and solid carbon. The hydrogen can then be used in the existing gas system, while the solid carbon could be used in myriad commercial and industrial applications. And it is yet another example of how harnessing the strengths of the existing gas system will support the decarbonization objectives of Fortis BC and the province. Innovative technologies such as the Hazer process have the potential to create new economic opportunities. With testing in the Kootenays now complete, FortisBC and Hazer are looking for a potential site in BC for a commercial-scale Hazer hydrogen plant. FortisBC, energy for a better BC and a better podcast.
Hello. You've reached the Hotel Pacifico Strategy Suite.
A lot going on this week.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to try and keep us tight so we can get to all these topics. But
A lot going on, but no obvious strategy in a few cases.
Less strategy, just suite. Just lots of content for the suite. Yeah.
And next week, if I could just talk about next week, is the budget.
Yeah.
Geoff and I are going to be locked up, throw away the key at budget lockup.
Mm-hmm.
And then we will do a special budget broadcast next week, just the two of us, because you are going to be away, I think.
Yeah. Sorry to miss it. Yeah.
I'll be in the old country.
Mm-hmm.
And so Geoff and I will carry the torch, and after reviewing hundreds of pages of budget documents, we will distill it into a very pithy commentary, right, Geoff?
Yeah, exactly.
I look forward to listening.
Why bother?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pithy commentary always, please.
Now, we have some mail.
We have mail.
To the hotel mail this week. Do you want me to read it?
Does
or
it
do you want
arrive?
to read
Does it arrive by carrier pigeon or like what?
Well, it arrived with the echoes of your rant. The famous Kate Hammer rant of 2 weeks ago on permitting still reverberates from coast to Rocky Mountains to the Yukon border here in British Columbia. I'll read it. Yeah. I'll read it.
Mm-hmm.
Dear, it didn't actually say this. Dear Hotel Pacifico, I felt the need to acknowledge Kate's rant on city permitting. Her experience is not unique. It's actually the norm, particularly if you have an older home. I'm sure you've heard of so-and-so's horror story in Whistler. I'm removing that name. I recently wanted to get a heat pump in Whistler, which for an unknown reason requires a permit. I got some advice on whether this could spiral and was told by a former senior planner, now working as a consultant. Yes, there are full-time consultants to navigate city permitting. If I got the wrong inspector, it could easily morph into a $100,000 problem simply because my home was built in the 1990s. It does not reflect current code requirements. Hence, no heat pump. And of course, most people won't speak up out of fear of retribution. Keep up the good work. So lots of people have their own stories on these types of things, right? Not to say that there aren't great people working in permitting in local government throughout the province, but there are lots of stories too that people like Kate and this person who mailed in are having lots of struggles about. So anyways, just wanted to thank the listener for sharing their story. Yeah.
I've actually, so noted, I've also paid for a code consultant to no avail. I also did not raise it on this pod a few times because I was convinced we were so close to getting this permit. I didn't want to muck it up. Of course, that would prove to be misplaced, my hope. And then interestingly, I had someone come up to me who similarly, like she works as an architect. And she was saying she had a similar issue with her own home. And her problem was timing as much as also just the added costs that she experienced. And I'm kind of collecting these phone numbers for who want to speak to people at City Council about just how awful the experience is. It's, I'm sure we'll come back to it. There's lots of fodder there. But thanks to all the folks again who've reached out. It's a sorry state of affairs, but it's I think at some point I thought, is it just us? Like, are we doing something wrong? And it's not just us, unfortunately. All right.
Back to scheduled programming.
Programming. Let's talk about the throne speech. I'm going to take a quick quote from the new LG, Wendy Kocha, and just try and summarize, I think, the point she was making. And it's, quote, "Trust has been broken and will not easily be repaired. No matter what the future has in store, one thing has been made clear: we will not leave our future success to the whims of unpredictable forces from beyond our borders, or leave people here to fend for themselves." So obviously,
I think your excerpt missed the 7 references to World War II. Very selective excerpt. How did you possibly just pull an excerpt out of the throne speech and not catch the World War II
Winston
references?
There
Churchill?
were a few
The
of
greatest
those.
generation,
Yeah,
other than
yeah.
Generation X, of course.
There, yeah.
Carry on, please.
Well, I was just gonna say, I think there was a lot of emphasis on trying to underscore these are consequential times, I guess, was the World War II references. I don't know, Mike. Are you feeling like it was a bit hyperbolic, perhaps? Is that what I'm picking up?
For those listeners who have not had the pleasure of watching Faulty Towers,
Oh, I hope there are a few of those because that is a
please go
pleasure.
please go to YouTube and Google "Don't mention the war." Faulty Towers. Don't mention the war.
Very
They
different
violated in
context.
this throne speech. They violated this. Yeah, so they're heavy on they're heavy on the narrative here that we are, yes, as you say, Kate, consequential times, and they're leaning in bigly to this narrative. And hey, it's an important time, no doubt about it. Canada's back is up against the wall here with President Donald Trump, no doubt.
Yeah, what did you think, Geoff? Did they need a lighter touch with that, or do you think they were meeting the moment?
Well, regrettably, in spite of the effort put into the throne speech, almost nobody hears any of it. So it's one of those, discouraging command performances where there's only a few people in the front row clapping lightly, usually. So
And so
sorry
much
about that.
effort goes into these too. It's true.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
I think as they go, it showed that the EB government's been able to find its feet after a long period of drift, really. And there's a purpose and a center to what they're doing. Focus on the work, which is around the tariff and the threat of Trump's tariffs and their threat to the economy, which is very large and hard to quantify. So I think in that respect, you could see the government seizing on this as the organizing principle for their politics, because there was not a lot of legislation forecast. And in fact, in the context of the throne speech, we learned a number of big commitments in the platform are not going to happen. The affordability measures and so on, that the upcoming budget, which is always a very political statement, even though it's stated in numbers, is really going to be an austerity budget. And a number of things that people may have been hoping for aren't going to happen because of Trump. So it sort of defined the lines for this session. And the other day, yesterday, in fact, I think the Conservatives stumbled straight into a trap, which had a big flashing light ahead of it and arrows pointing to the hole in the ground.
Well, we're
You're getting ahead of me. You're getting ahead of us. Yeah.
We are going to
Okay.
get
Jeff
to that.
can't wait. He's so excited.
But,
No, well,
but
the
let's.
throne speech was happening during our show last week, so that seems like ancient history to me.
It is
Okay.
ancient history, but I think it bears mentioning that in the first couple question periods that happened since last week, since we recorded last week, that there is this I would view it as a dichotomy between the government, the throne speech, and what the narrative the government wants to pursue, which is the response to the terror threat and the leadership they are purporting to demonstrate in that moment to rally British Columbians and get the economy, versus day-to-day reality and all the issues that are still there that are difficult to sweep.
Events, dear boys. The other events.
Yeah, well, I mean, just the stuff that was there that was a problem.
Or even just,
the stuff that was already there that was a problem. So
community safety and yep.
So the one, well, do we have a clipping of the week?
We have a clipping of the week. Mike, you set those up so well. Thank you, sir. Right. Our clipping comes from Les Lane in the Times columnist, writing about an early win for the Conservatives. I'll quote directly from Les. Conservative Party of BC MLAs scored a significant win Wednesday, even before they opened their mouths to start the inaugural question period in the new parliament. NDP Health Minister Josie Osborne announced a significant curtailment of the safe supply policy for dealing with opioid addiction, and it looks to be in direct response to the concerns the opposition started raising 2 years ago. After repeatedly discounting questions about whether hard drugs prescribed to protect people from deadly street supply were being diverted to the black market, the government finally fully acknowledged it is a significant problem. It was Conservative critic Eleanor Sturko who pursued the issue and shared a devastating leaked government document that confirmed the problem. She was on the verge of tears after Osborne's announcement, thinking about all the lives lost.
So a couple things I'd say to that is first of all, I think government was trying to get that issue out of the way more and
Hmm.
move on with life. But it's an issue of their own making that they had to reckon with, and it takes them every time they're talking about that, they're not talking about the stuff they want to talk about. And I think it's it shows the effectiveness of Eleanor Sturco's critic, where she's a dog with a bone on these issues, and she doesn't let up, and she knows how to play the game of getting the media attention and tying together question period with media tactics and being consistent over time on an issue, which is given the whirl that's been taking place within the conservatives about Eleanor Sturco.
Hmm.
She's a high performer on this kind of stuff, right?
Well, I was just going to say, wouldn't an important audience be her colleagues within the Conservative caucus?
Yeah, I think when you've got, well, let's just use a sports analogy. You've got a player who scores a lot of goals, but maybe you don't like him in the dressing room.
Mm.
Like it's there's a whole bunch of things that go into it. Um, but I think we have to give the conservatives their due that in
Hmm.
so here's an example of an issue that they've been consistent on over time, and the government has backed down, and the government's changed their tack, and that's the sign of a good opposition is when they actually affect a change in government policy. Now,
Well,
there's
there's a side to this that I think is worth daylighting, and I want to have to start by saying I think diversion of safe supply is a real problem. It's always been a real problem. That the handling of this leak was not good enough. There should have been a much quicker response to explain what these numbers meant. The reality is the number of people receiving safe supply prescriptions is about 5,000 out of the 100,000 British Columbians who have a diagnosed disorder, and another 100,000 who don't. And part of the government's defense over this period of time was we think that the harm from diversion is probably outweighed by the benefit received by this very small group. The numbers that came out were driven in part. The story's been driven by a really interesting thing that I think we ought to keep an eye on. The news about safe supply was driven by Adam Zivo and people at the National Post, reporters in the alt-right ecosystem of media. Totally fair game. I'm not whining about that. I'm just saying that needs to be taken into account. Then it's there for political workers like political officials like Eleanor Sturco is very skilled to pick them up and bring them into the political arena, tweet them out, and so on and so forth. And then when this leak falls in their lap, they score a pretty big goal against the government. But this is part of the conservative political ecosystem that I think we've got to continue to pay attention to, because all of those groups, like Adam Zivo and his work on the National Post, some of the alt-right commentators and Sturco were all taking victory laps because of the collaboration that they'd put together on that front. And I think we see this in a number of cases where what are really not that big a deal, and I'm not saying diversion is not a big deal, but the much bigger deal is the multi-billion-dollar organized crime syndicates that are selling the rest of the drugs,
Yeah.
and are actually killing most of the people. And I've always puzzled at why the government is not taken to task for its failure to rein in organized crime, but is pilloried for this thing. It's an interesting question, which maybe we'll see play out differently in the future. But the
Yeah.
drugs that are killing people are being sold by organizations which the federal government now wants us to name as terrorist organizations. I know I'm leaping around, but that side of the room is very confused about what the real problem is with overdose crisis.
Yeah, exactly. And just to say, it's really important to it's not just safe supply. It's not drugs within safe supply. They're not the only ones going to unintended destinations, right? This is to silo this, I think, is unfair.
I
That
do note
said,
that Josie Osborne at that news conference was asked, did she talk to Bonnie Henry? And she said no.
mhm,
And
mhm,
and it was said in a way that kind of reminded me of government's previous relationship with Lisa LaPointe, the former chief coroner, where there's a gulf started to open up in policy between independent officers and actually government health policy. So
mhm.
I'm wondering where that's going to go. I'm not even sure how much time Bonnie Henry has left in her term.
I don't think it's
Well,
very much. I thought that was, it was a truthful answer, but it's a regrettable situation. And I make a distinction between the coroner, who has one role, but in the case of Lisa LaPointe, developed it in a very unique
mhm,
direction, and Bonnie Henry, whose actual job is to give advice on this front. And her
mhm,
advice was well known, and they were going to not take it.
mhm,
What this points to ahead for Josie Osborne and for the government generally is extremely difficult operational decisions that need to be made to manage this whole new process of monitored safe supply to the degree that it works, while setting up involuntary care. And we've seen this week how costly that's going to be in Alberta. I don't know how costly it'll be here. The drug crisis is not going anywhere, and will continue to plague governments of whatever stripe, I think, for some time.
We
So
talk about
that's-
it.
Yeah,
Can we talk about another healthcare crisis?
that's where I'll do it. Well, like, right? So they've got, healthcare also in crisis this week. We had the closures of the emergency department in Delta. We had, I don't know what to call it, but the Fraser Health CEO, we had the announcement of
She left suddenly. She left rather suddenly, which is a bit surprising.
It wasn't the announcement just like, here's the interim CEO, welcome them. Like, we have it's completely opaque what happened there.
No clue what the circumstances are, other than Victoria Lee had been there for a while.
Yeah.
And so Delta, it's like Delta was shut down for 36 hours or something like that. And if I'm a Delta, I'm concerned. Certainly politicians are jumping on it, and so are, Global TV and other stations are jumping on it. But it's like, well, at least you can drive to Surrey or Richmond or Vancouver and get an ER. It's not ideal, obviously, but you can still get coverage in the Lower Mainland, albeit there'll probably be a long lineup. Whereas these rural guys are screwed, right? Like they're Lillooet, Williams Lake, whatever.
There's a real access issue.
Winter weather, especially, that's really troubling.
Yeah.
Not to minimize Delta, but so I mean the fact that if and then emissions had closures too, so if these start creeping into the Lower Mainland more, it just becomes a bigger and bigger an issue. And I honestly don't know what the provincial government's going to do about all this stuff. Like I know that they think they're making progress.
It's a national phenomenon.
Yeah, and it's public health care, is maybe set to collapse, right? In terms of how much money it needs to sustain itself. Like I don't know what the answer is, but it's not pointing in the right direction by the looks of it.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So
all these Terrafor notwithstanding, the regular business of government is still politically problematic.
Yeah.
We'll see what the budget holds next week.
Yeah, that's still a lot to work on there. Okay, and then let's go back to the Conservatives and some of the challenges for them, because this week we saw Dallas Brody, AG critic, tweeting about making some statements about Canada's residential schools, and I think that could be fairly called residential school denialism. John Rust had asked her to take down the tweets, and so far no dice. So I think that points to, again, I think some of that caucus management stuff. I mean, going back to the point about Eleanor Sturko, like it's sort of like you've got these sort of strong performers and some people who've been around longer, and then maybe a division against a more strident group who want to take a very different approach. And I think for John Rust, how you bring those groups together under a tent is going to be a challenge.
Yeah. Well, he's not the leader of the Conservatives. He's the spokesperson for the Conservative caucus in the legislature. He tried to rein in Eleanor Sturko. It didn't work. He's got a group of people whose names change, who will not collaborate with each other or with him. And, I started to discuss the tariff one. I think this is a good opportunity to raise it. The government came marching forward with a private member's bill, basically saying this House condemns Trump and his tariff war. And 5 members of the Conservative caucus, who had all day to think about it because they called division in the morning and didn't vote till the afternoon, decided not to support the rest of their caucus members and not to support that bill. So this was, a gift to the NDP, frankly, because people actually do want us to fight Trump. And it's a big problem for the Conservatives. I'll be interested to see if they can still be considered a single unit by the fall at this rate. This was a really bad week for them, I think. But to go back to Brody, I was wondering, Kate, if you would take an effort, and I'm not encouraging you to explain what triggered her tweet, because the backstory is so complicated. The tweet became the story. She jumped in on the side of a guy who's having a beef with the Law Society about what their curriculum should say about residential schools, and then did a tweet which triggered a tsunami of outrage and denunciations and so forth, which secured her stature as kind of another one of the people who will not be canceled, who will insist on speaking their mind and so on. the beginning of the whole story is really something off the government's radar in the curriculum of a law society project of some kind. Not as much, denialism of residential schools, not to be sneezed at. It's a big problem. But I was struck by how she picked the fight, refused to back down. And now there's another issue, which really is not the one that John Rustad wants to be talking about. He wanted them to stop talking about residential school denialism, but now we can't even rein in Dallas Brody.
It's a great point, Geoff, because I think one of the important distinctions, I mean, having watched other caucuses, come together and try and find unity, I think it's important to say, like, what's happening here, and Dallas Brody's a good example of it. It isn't kind of people stepping on rakes. And I'd use also the example of the letter that was written against Eleanor Sturko. Like, it's people who feel like they are standing up righteously. Like, they feel like they feel, I think, very invested in forcing the Conservatives to take different tacks and to speak up independently. So I feel like this problem is not going to go away for John Rustad.
Well, Alia Warbus, of course, of eminent Indigenous background, spoke out against Dallas Brody's comments. She's the House leader of the formation called the BC Conservative Party in the legislature.
So we know, what are there, 44 Conservative MLAs?
44.
We know there were 13 who sent that letter regarding Sturco.
Right.
And I think the 5 that voted against the private members bill are all within that group of 13.
Within the 15.
Group of 13.
13, sorry.
And then there's Brody, who's also in that group, both those groups. So, there is a flank within the Conservatives that part of it is they actually take John Rustad at his word that there is free speech in the Conservative Party and that there will be free votes and people will be able to speak their mind, and that is something they have leaned into as a virtue. I will point out that despite their admiration for Pierre Poilievre, no such right of free speech exists in the federal Conservative caucus, I can assure you. In fact, they are so buttoned down and disciplined about any bozo eruptions that anyone who steps out of line will be sent to walk the plank. So BC
John
Conservatives
John Rustad is looking for BC's Jenny Byrne.
They are living in a test tube or something. They are breaking new ground in terms of testing the bounds of political freedom, and I don't think it's going to work out for them that managing that way. I don't know at the end of the day how many voters really care, but I think Geoff and I probably agree that our experience tells us that when you have a caucus that does unpredictable things and has division within it, and a large group of caucus feel like they're team players and these guys aren't, that's, not a great recipe.
Big problem. If you're standing up there saying, I'd like to run the province, but me and my friends here can't figure out who's going to wash the dishes or take out the garbage, it's not a compelling argument. And that's how it looks right now for the Conservatives. They can't agree on the time of day.
Yeah. And, I look at one of the guys who's the Conservative MLA, has been part of these groups, Jordan Keeley. And you can say, well, who are these guys? And, they just got elected by a fluke. Well, Jordan Keeley got more votes percentage-wise than any MLA in the legislature. He got like 72% of the vote at Peace River North. So it's not like he's not representing views that exist, right? Like he may well be reflecting the views of his constituents as they are today, right? So it's not like they're completely rogue. This is what's inside, people's views in British Columbia, in certain parts of the province. So we'll see how it plays out. It's the convention this weekend in Nanaimo is an annual general meeting. Where they'll elect a new executive. I have heard various things that there may be a race for president, and these it'll be perhaps a proxy fight over these different philosophies. So we'll see how it comes out the other side. The candidate in Langara, Brian
Brigette.
Apologies for pronunciation. He tweeted out in response to the Dallas Brody tweets. John Rustad is a coward and needs to be replaced. This is a guy that ran in Langara and missed, should have. It's a seat the Conservatives should have won. And arguably, the Conservatives should have gone with more than arguably, they should have gone with the BC United candidate, Jamie Stein. And they stuck by this guy who had already got into controversies over comments. I can't remember what they were, might have been abortion or something.
Terrible comments, yeah.
And they stuck with him. And this is the reward Rustad gets, is that he should resign. So, I wonder if out of that AGM this weekend, if Rustad's team holds sway over the party, that there may be, changes, coming where it's like, okay, it's time to grow up, and we're going to get some grown-ups behind me that we can make a push to get some of those seats we just missed last time that we shouldn't have lost, and maybe got to show a different look to some voters that have said no to us.
Are you hearing anything, Mike, about how John Rustad is trying to manage this? Like what his approach is with caucus to try and bring folks together?
No, I think it's all evolving in real time, frankly. I mean, you got a brand new staff, got a brand new caucus. I think they're all like, the learning curve is steep. You've got about, 6 or 7 MLAs who have been there before. And so there's probably, you got your Peter Millbars and your Trevor Halfords and a few people who've been around the block and know what it's like to be part of a caucus. And they're probably trying to teach the new
Mike,
ones as well.
I have a supplementary that you just triggered in me. It's about 2017 and Rustad's initiative this week to propose that thermal coal be put under some kind of special levy to punish the Americans for the tariffs. Now, am I wrong or am I right that this is not a zombie recreation of a policy advanced by Christy Clark in the 2017 campaign?
Well, I think what she said in 2017 in response to Trump's threats on softwood lumber was that Canada should ban the export of thermal coal through Canadian ports. Right. I think she called for an outright ban, and I do not believe that was well received by the terminals who ship coal, but it was similar. And there's a federal Liberal platform point that also last election, the federal Liberals said they would ban the export of thermal coal from the U.S. By 2030, I think.
But it was a unique intervention from a guy who hates the carbon tax and so on and so forth. But anyway.
Yeah, I thought it was a bit weird that he's suggesting the carbon tax as a tool, because I thought the carbon tax was just, why even let those words come out of your mouth?
No. It's to clarify his position. He doesn't hate taxes. He hates taxes that apply to British Columbians. We can tax everybody else. That's the distinction.
He doesn't hate deficits because he was going to increase it.
Yeah. We can go back to that another time. I mean, we will with the budget. I mean, okay. Well, just to say too on that point, I think Ravi Kahlon responded pretty quickly to say, and I thought this was a good move to just go, sure, all ideas are on the table. We're soliciting all ideas and just move past the coal thing. For our listeners' edification, there is coal, I think it's Wyoming and Montana, that gets shipped through West Shore terminals in Delta.
That's
I don't think it's
That's true. Thanks for raising that.
I don't know if it's a huge amount of thermal coal, because they do ship metallurgical coal as well through that terminal. And that terminal is actually being transformed to do a potash terminal as well right now. But
where did you say it was going? Wyoming? And where else?
Coming from Wyoming.
From Wyoming.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
It's coming across the border, because it's not easy to ship coal out through the U.S.
But what was the other state? Wyoming and
Montana, I think.
Montana,
and there might be other places too. So I mean, it's been a political target over in the past, and as Geoff noted, Christie brought it up in 2017 as a tactic to fight Trump. So the zombie, is a zombie policy.
It's not, nobody's shaking in their booties on that one, though, I'm going to say, except for the people here. That's a tough one. All right. We're going to try and squeeze it in before we go. Because I do want to talk about the Vancouver Integrity Commissioner wrapping ABC over the knuckles for meeting in caucus before council meetings. I mean, this is really, go ahead.
I think that actually, you know what, I think it might have been specifically about the park board, but I think
that's
the same principle applies here. I think I may have led you astray with the script there.
What wasn't it? But but ABC councils are there too.
Same principle applies.
Yeah, no, but
it's basically when one party's people meet, and if there's a critical mass of them that meet as a caucus before a council meeting. Geoff, maybe you should pick up the thread here because you've actually been on council.
Well, the way it goes is this: is that let's assume for a moment that there's no political parties at council. If a group of council members who are big enough to control the vote meet privately and have a discussion about doing that, the law prevents it. It says you're not allowed to do that. It becomes a council meeting, which must be properly minuted and so forth. So the law is designed for a situation where you don't have party politics, which is 95% of the province, and it stops little cliques from going away and having private meetings and deciding things on their own and not letting anybody have any debate and so forth. That's the intention. In a situation where you have party politics, it's very difficult for a group that has the majority not to meet and discuss what they're going to do, how to deliver their platform and so forth. And so in my time on council, we always met as a caucus, but we didn't bind each other to there was strong moral suasion, but no direct sanctions if you decided to break ranks. So if you hated a particular project and voted no, that was fine. There'd be a meeting ahead of time. People would say, what do you think about this? But if somebody said, I hate it, and they came out and voted against it, the key thing was to protect the debate in council. What happened with the park board folks is they fell afoul of this law. And Vancouver's Integrity Commissioner, which is a fantastic office that was an innovation of the Vancouver Council, and many of them may wish they'd never thought of, investigated this and said, yes, you should not have conducted yourself in that way. So I'm not sure how it's going to happen down the road. I mean, it's interesting for Ken Sim because he has a big majority, but it's fracturing all around him with the expulsion of Rebecca Bly, who has been thrown out precisely because they say she's not aligned with their core values, although no one's pointed to a specific case in which they really didn't like what she did. So,
I just mentioned Jamie Stein a minute ago in reference to Vancouver Langara. He's now running as ABC candidate for the by-election, along with the head of the police union,
Ralph Kaisers,
who are both running as ABC candidates. So even though the ABC's fractured, the standings of council right now are 7 ABC, 1 independent, and 1 green. Yeah. So if they win those 2 spots, they're going to dominate council.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think it's a little bit ridiculous.
It's hard, eh?
It's naive to think that the ABC councillors can't get together and talk and not call it a council meeting. Well,
this is what I wanted to ask Geoff, because I'm like, are Mike and I, because we come from provincial politics, just like going to be like not get it? Because it happens at other levels so regularly. And then what about municipal politics would mean that can't happen? Like, what would be the distinction there?
Well,
that would make that more.
I don't really get it either. I think that it really flows. You only get into trouble when you get into a party system and people are implementing a platform. Generally speaking, it never comes up because people all run as independents in most civic elections. But in some of these cases, a lot can turn on one vote. It can mean a lot to a particular individual who may be seeking to get approval of a big rezoning for a large project, and it can have consequences in other ways as well. So it's important that people not feel they have no option but to support the party line. And I voted against the caucus majority on a couple of occasions, not on big matters, but others did on lesser or larger matters. And that's what basically they're looking for, is the ability of people to be independent if that's how they see it.
All right.
But I agree, it's confusing. As part of the confusion that exists around the. But I'll save the rest of my comments for the toast at the end.
Greetings, Canadian Political Pod listener. I'm your narrator, Gary, an artificial intelligence-generated voice. Exciting and serious sounding is what we typed in the AI voiceover input field. And boom, Gary exists. Hey, do you know what's not artificial? Not even one bit? The highly influential audiences air quotes media podcasts offer to its advertisers. And I say that with all the sincerity A machine learning, data-optimized, predictive network of interconnected neural nodes can muster. Whether your ad message is on Curse of Politics, the hurly-burly, Hotel Pacifico, or the brand new Race to Replace, you will be reaching cabinet ministers, members of parliament, the political class, the C-suite, and corporate Canada, leading journalists, and tens of thousands of engaged Canadians. People saying this is a unique political moment is underselling it. Policy is under scrutiny. A party leader is being voted on. The Ontario election is underway. There will be a new prime minister. And then there's the guy living in the White House who calls us the 51st state. Does anyone remember another time like this? I'm instantly scouring millions of data points to answer my own rhetorical question. No, you do not. This is when you need to get your message to the decision makers. Email us at contact@airquotesmedia.com. You'll be dealing with Jill and Todd, who are real, not artificial at all people, and generally very friendly. Well, Jill is anyway. We're still deciding about Todd.
Let's raise a glass or take a shot. Time to raid the minibar.
I want to raise a glass to the integrity commissioner because no one even knows her name. And she's dominating civic politics right now because you don't want to get your knuckles wrapped by the integrity commissioner.
Is she dominating city politics? Like,
okay,
all right. This is a big. This is
the minibar, man. I'm entitled to hyperbole.
I agree.
You know what? She's a bigger deal than you would think. And I've seen her shaking her head, and I shake my head the same way about this. Like, how did this happen? But let's name names. Lisa Southern, integrity commissioner. Just the title gives her weight and gravitas. It's like, a judge may convict you of who knows what, spending too long in a no parking zone or first-degree murder. You don't want to go in front of the judge. This integrity commissioner, with just the name, suggests maybe some really bad stuff's been going down at City Hall. You don't want your knuckle wrapped by the integrity commissioner. And that's what Ken Sim decided, is I don't want to be found wanting by the integrity commissioner, even if it's on a really trivial matter. So here's to Lisa Southern, who, with whatever running for election or anything else, has been quite a big player. I'll tone it down, Mike. Just quite a big player in civic politics.
I have nothing against Lisa Southern. I don't even know her, but I would like to appoint Vancouver's 700,000 residents as integrity commissioners and let them decide at the election if they think their politicians have integrity. I mean, I'm all in favor of integrity. Don't get me wrong. I just having to have commissioners tell us on these things. I don't know. Just, anyways, bah humbug. Okay, I'll go.
Go.
Feel free to interrupt me.
We always do. Do we need an invitation, Geoff?
I've had a number of topics swirling around in my head this week, but since we didn't get time to talk about it in the strategy suite, I don't know whether to take a shot or raise a glass. I mean, I guess I'm going to take a shot at just generally the situation with community news right now, because last week it was announced that Tri-City News and Burnaby Now and Newsminster Record are closing. And that's a big deal. The Tri-City News, for instance, is a paper record. And 10, 20 years ago, when I was more involved in, communications to these types of outlets, like, it mattered. The editor, the news reporter were important players in, municipal and provincial political affairs in those communities and in Burnaby and other places. So it's just a matter of time before more of these fall like dominoes, right? Whether it's Maple Ridge or you name it, Abbotsford, who knows? So our old buddy, Glenn Clark, is now the CEO of Overstory, which has some of these online publications, which they're basically all online now anyways. But so maybe Overstory is going to fill the gap. I don't know. They've got one in Burnaby already, Burnaby Beacon. But that is a loss to community infrastructure if that function is not replaced. Someone has to be there reporting on the municipal council. Someone has to be there talking about what the big issues are. These are towns of like 200,000 people in Coquitlam, right? So, or something like that. Vancouver Sun's not going to do it. any horsepower anymore. So I'm optimistic, maybe naively optimistic that something will fill the vacuum there. But if there isn't, are we all just going to be on these community Facebook pages, and that's where we get our community news? Because that's basically what happens in a lot of places now. People just go on the big group thing, and God knows what's on there. It's not visible really to people in the outside world. So, yeah, I mean, the federal government's thrown money at local journalism, these local journalism initiatives, and that's problematic as well. So I don't know. Facebook ads, I think, are killing community news because advertisers are going in if they want to reach people in, Port Moody. They're just going in and dumping money into the digital analytics and stuff, and spits out 35 to 54-year-old women in Port Moody. Boom, done. Drop it into Facebook, calibrate your ad to get an ROI on it. And community newspapers haven't been able to compete with that. So there's my plea for community journalism, economics, and maybe Glenn Clark will figure it out.
Completely agree. Very worrisome time.
I've had this weird experience with this episode where I feel like the things I kept thinking of for the mini bar
Did I just steal yours?
No, it's all good.
I'm looking at it.
There's so many directions I can go. It's all good. And actually, you know what? I'll just finish this off and like raise a glass to all the reporters who will be faced with losing their jobs, and writers and editors. It's a tough time, and I'll raise a glass to them. And that'll cap us off for another episode. I want to thank our guest, Janet Austin, and our presenting sponsor, TELUS and Fortis BC. We will see you next week, guests. BC, you can never leave.
Check out time at Hotel Pacifico. We hope you enjoyed your stay.